Spider-Man Far From Home is the most misunderstood Spider-Man film in the entire legacy. As much as some people like to defend Raimi's Spider-Man 3 or Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man film, I can't really argue with the problems people had with those films, even though I also enjoyed, well, most of them. But the flack behind Far From Home creeped up seemingly out of nowhere over the years, as the film was generally well received by critics and audiences upon its release, a good chunk, as I remember, even dubbing it as better than the first film. It also contributed to 2019's insanely successful box office that we're never going to see again, like ever. Part of it may be the MCU fatigue seeping in for a lot of people, as has happened with a lot of films for a lot of people, and I suppose it's also hard for any Spider-Man film to compare to a lot of other Spider-Man films of today, including the very sequel to this one. But unlike something like Frozen or A Christmas Story, where the films themselves don't really have any issues and cultural perspective has simply shifted over the years, the main problem people had with Far From Home was actually there from the beginning. I mean, there's a few other issues that people had with it, like Aunt May's characterization being a little too zany and energized, even though they kinda established that being her personality in Homecoming as well as in Civil War, or the admittedly half-baked backstory behind Mysterio, which was jarring even for me, as it was basically a case of Sony pretending like they had a handle on the legacy of the MCU, and they really don't. But at the same time, I don't really know how else they could have worked Mysterio into the story, and especially after that illusion scene that still stands as Marvel's best horror take to date, despite their effort, I'm just glad that they got Mysterio into the story at all. And then there's Edith, the plot device that nobody would shut up about, talking about how ridiculous it is that Tony would give a pair of glasses to a teenager, one that he built up a bond with, I might add, giving him access to an insanely dangerous defense network with no instructions, no nothing, blah blah blah. Yeah, the guy who announces his home address to the press to take on a famous terrorist and beats the shit out of a super soldier for killing his mommy would never do something so stubborn and stupid. That's completely out of character. As you can probably tell, that was supposed to be the main topic of this video, but doing some research, I found that more people actually have a bigger problem with the film being a Spider-Man film, but also not really. Throughout the character's film legacy prior to his introduction into the MCU, people were perfectly pleased, amazed even, who knew, with Spider-Man being his own solo character in a world where he's a solo superhero. Part of the problem with his involvement in the MCU is that by the time he was inducted in, there was already a gaggle of superheroes trained up and experienced with the dangers at hand. So the way he was introduced, especially with part of his general character being he's in high school, is that everyone basically sees him as just a kid. People kinda had a problem with this in Homecoming, but the way they built up his character by the end, he had come of age and realized that he's better off standing on his own 2 feet and being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, as he put it. If I had to take a guess, I would say that people were most likely ready to see him stand on his own after this, and the way I'm interpreting these reactions, part of the disappointment behind Far From Home was that it basically undid his arc and had him start it over again, which, as Chris Nolan had to find out, doesn't fare well with audiences. It's understandable how frustrating it can come off even after, spoilers for Endgame, Tony Stark's death. Peter is still undermined by his legacy. People were ready to see Spider-Man be Spider-Man for once, and instead everyone's talking about how great Tony Stark is and how Peter basically needs to fill his shoes. Instead of becoming Spider-Man, everyone's pushing Peter to become the next Tony Stark. Understandably frustrating, but hear me out on this. While I do appreciate that the next film in the series would basically be the standalone Spider-Man film that everyone wanted, and that the next couple of films we're getting will most likely be more focused on Spider-Man simply being Spider-Man, my thing is it would be jarring if this film coming out right after Endgame would be nothing more than a conventional Spider-Man film, or anything different from what we got. Whether you found Endgame to be the ground-shattering event that everyone was hyping it up to be, or you're like me and you, well, don't, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that it left some huge ramifications, mostly with what characters it kills off, and much like how WandaVision centered around Wanda's grief for Vision, or Hawkeye focused on the grief that Clint went through for Natasha, it would feel too unnatural for Peter, and Happy for that matter, to not go through the grief they went through after a devastating loss like Tony Stark. And on top of that, to lose one of the original Avengers obviously leaves some big shoes to fill, and
please, you've been to space.
A lot of people debated if the MCU should have even continued after Endgame, but if it did, I honestly feel like this is what the characters would be doing, mourning and trying to figure out what next step to take, as we've seen in some other Phase 4 projects. But with that said, does that make this a Spider-Man film or a kissing up to Tony Stark's ego film? Well, I think given the circumstances, it has permission to be both. It's this version of Spider-Man's emotional journey through his grief for the loss of his father figure that he just got to the point of hugging right before his passing. Granted, Granted, he did indeed go through the journey of learning that he needed to stand on his own in Homecoming, but this is the film where he and others truly needed to act without Tony and basically realized that they weren't ready. And he especially gets floored, basically realizing that not only was he not already doing it, he wasn't prepared for it. If that's not the perfect representation of grief, the idea that you're not actually prepared for when the death of a loved one happens and that basically catches you off guard and you have to just press through it, I don't know what is. But as much as people were hoping that the next Spider-Man film they were going to get was going to be one where he just stood on his own, because he truly had to stand on his own in this film, it helped transition over to the film, or in the case of the future films, where he would get to stand on his own feet. But to me anyway, it's understandable that this Spider-Man had to go through a grieving period to stand on his own like we've wanted. Again, I'm not going to act like the film is perfect or that you're wrong for not liking it or even preferring some of the later films for being more exclusive to the Spider-Man lore, but where I feel like the misunderstanding is coming from is this idea that Spider-Man could have just been Spider-Man straight up. Apart from the fact that we've already had 2 adaptations like that, I mean, it'd be one thing if we just had one. The coming-of-age angle that Jon Watts' interpretation of the character took built up the character and got him from the low point that a lot of people didn't seem to like to crawling up to the peak that most people seem to adore nowadays. And again, especially after something as devastating as Endgame, that wasn't going to happen overnight. I guess what I'm getting at is that even if it wasn't the Spider-Man film that everyone wanted necessarily, it was the Spider-Man film we needed to get the Spider-Man film we wanted. If it still doesn't do it for you and you just prefer straight up Spider-Man being Spider-Man, I can understand that. But for me, this transition that led to him standing on his own was too essential to what I consider to be a pretty rich and inspiring arc that a lot of people who didn't see Tom as Spider-Man before really started to see it leap off the screen in his next film. And I feel like that's where the misunderstanding comes from. Peter getting overshadowed by Tony in this film is not a takeover or a distraction on Tony's part, especially one where he's dead, but instead, for Peter, a transition to moving forward with his life without Tony, as several other people are attempting to do without him or a good chunk of the rest of the Avengers. A transition from his boyhood into his manhood so he can stop being Spider-Boy and start being Spider-Man. A transition into the amazing Spider-Man we've come to know and love. And that's what makes Far From Home, suitably enough, an amazing and misunderstood Spider-Man film.